I also want you to talk a little bit about what happened with Mitch McConnell. He just had a stroke in front of the camera, and of course, Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden. So there's gerontocracy. What is your view on that? Why is that happening? In our system?
Well, in a democracy, it should just be a matter of who gets the most votes, right? And so you would think that your politicians would be very charismatic, very exciting, but Joe Biden, Dianne Feinstein, and Mitch McConnell are all what you can call machine politicians, meaning that their power doesn't come from the fact that they built mass popularity. That they represent, especially Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden, they represent the Democratic Party's urban political machines. Now, Mitch McConnell represents, the conservative, forces, but all of these figures, they represent entrenched power in the United States, that they can't lose their seat, even though the USA is supposed to be a democracy. They have made so many backroom deals, and they've been there so long that they've kind of risen up to the top, even though they're at this point clearly not all there. Dianne Feinstein, the roots of her career are particularly weird. I don't know if people are familiar, but San Francisco, is a city that, in the United States has a pretty wild history. And the mayor of San Francisco was a guy named George Moscone. And George Moscone was like kind of a leftist, kind of a socialist, kind of a radical. And George Moscone had gotten elected, and his close ally was a guy named Harvey Milk, who was the first openly gay elected official as well. And they were running San Francisco in the 70s. And they had gotten the support from a pastor, a minister named Reverend Jim Jones, whose fault. And then shortly after they were elected, Jim Jones and his followers moved to Guyana because all kinds of scandals were revealed about, abuse going on in the church and stuff. And then they committed mass suicide. And it was, in Guyana, they drank Kool-Aid and they committed mass suicide, right? 2 weeks later, George Moscone and Harvey Milk were both assassinated in the city hall of San Francisco. They were shot by a former police officer, and Dianne Feinstein was declared mayor of San Francisco. And it's very mysterious. The police officer who shot the mayor and city councilman Harvey Milk was only given a 2-year prison sentence. And he used the Twinkie defense. He said that junk food made him do it, right? And the origin of Dianne Feinstein's career is basically you had this very far left government in San Francisco that was tied in with an abusive minister whose followers committed mass suicide. And in the aftermath of that, 2 dramatic assassinations, and then she was picked. And then what really made Dianne Feinstein's career, and this is very interesting, is that the gay people were very upset that the first gay elected official, Harvey Milk, had been killed. And so they went out and rioted in response to the killing. And she was famous for telling the police of San Francisco to back off and let the gay people riot. And people compared Dianne Feinstein to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. And that she was this very short woman of Jewish heritage that gay people really liked. She was a friend of the gay people. And so when they were upset about Harvey Milk being killed, she let them go out and riot. And that's how she kind of rose in ascendancy from being the mayor of San Francisco to eventually being in the U.S. Senate. And the California machine of the Democratic Party is notoriously corrupt. I mean, that's, you look at people talk about California and just how nothing can get done. The roads can't get fixed. There's just a huge amount of corruption in the California wing of the Democratic Party. The San Francisco machine that brought us Nancy Pelosi, that brought us Kamala Harris, is notoriously corrupt. And Dianne Feinstein is the face of that. And she's been in politics for years and years and years, and she's not all there. I mean, you saw the clip. They're telling her how to vote. They're just, she's making a statement. They're like, just say aye, just say aye. Oh, she doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know what she's doing. And it's a sign of corruption. And Joe Biden has run, it's a similar story. He's run Delaware politics since he was a younger man. Since he was in his 20s, he's been in politics in Delaware. His family were in politics in Delaware. Delaware is a mostly black city, or a mostly black state that's very small. Wilmington is the only city of any substantial population in Delaware. It's mostly African American, but it's where almost all the major corporations are headquartered in Delaware. It's a tax haven, and Joe Biden has been running Delaware's politics for decade after decade. And this is an example of entrenched power and corruption. in American politics. The fact that these folks don't just retire and let a younger person that's more charismatic and more alert take over. It's the fact that it's kind of they talk about a pecking order, in American politics. That's what I see when I see these videos of Mitch McConnell and Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden. That's what I see. What do you think?
I have a mixed feeling about this because yes, they are old. What we can see now, absolutely. But I think if you remember during the debate to go into Iraq, do you remember Robert Byrd?
Yes.
He was the one against it. He was 84 years old and he was firm. Okay, so it's not entirely, and John Fetterman, if you know who that is, he's like a 52, 53. He's not old, but he had a stroke. And he sometimes now there was some embarrassing moment for him as well, even though he's 53, so he's not that old. So I don't know what's the best approach, because if you ask me who I should vote for between Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, for example, I would prefer Bernie Sanders.
Sure.
Right? So even though Pete Buttigieg is 41, I think, Bernie Sanders is over 80, right? So this age thing is very hard for me. On the one hand, I totally see the problems, absolutely. At the same time, my own grandmother, she lived to 101 years old, and she had really sharp brain. For amusement, when she was 99 years old, she had a pneumonia, and everybody thought that was the end of it. So my mom running, took a train directly from Beijing to Shanghai to go see her the last time. Okay, but she recovered. And then she was leaving the hospital. And as they were leaving, she was in the hospital for a couple of days. So she asked my uncle and saying, how much does it cost for those staying here for those past few days? My uncle just made up a number. He didn't want her to worry about these things. He just said, oh, it's not much. It's 1,000 yuan, something like that. Even so, my grandmother's still not happy. She still thinks we pay too much. So she was talking loudly with the nurse, and doctors were all there. And she said, well, in my age, I came to a hospital and I'm living here well and alive. I'm doing such a good service for you guys. You should pay me. Everybody was there, the doctors, nurses, he was talking to them, even though he was facing to my uncle. I mean, she's that sharp. That's my grandmother at 99 years old. So I don't have a good answer to it. I do think there has to be some kind of a mental test or something that they can measure some people, because with Dianne Feinstein and with Joe Biden in particular, right? I do find that's troubling to me. So I don't have. I'm kind of conflicted. Don't you think?
I think it's not simply an issue of these people being old. I think it's the fact that a lot of them are just actors, and
yes.
they've been actors all along. And when they get older, it's harder to cover that up.
Yes. Okay.
I think that's more the issue, right? Bernie Sanders has not always been an actor. He's actually a very sharp person who, so, he may be old, but he's still all there. But these older folks that have, Pete Buttigieg, I'm sure, is just as much of a puppet as Feinstein or Biden, but he's young enough that he can cover it up. One thing about Pete Buttigieg that perplexes me is the top of his face never moves. Have you ever noticed this? Like the bottom of his face moves, but the eyes are like solid, like they just never move. And that is very odd. That is very, very odd. And I don't know what that means, but it's very strange. His eyebrows, his eyes never move. He's just constantly, it's very, very bizarre.
And I just don't care how old he is. I just don't want him to be my president. Let me be very clear about that. Anything else from the US you want to talk about before I conclude? No?
We're paying attention to US politics. We just sent huge amounts of weaponry to Ukraine while our country is falling apart. Donald Trump is being hit with more and more criminal charges to make it harder for him to run for president. The trial would take place right after the Republican primary. So if he were to win the nomination, he would then immediately go to trial to determine whether he, ends up running from jail or not. And this all just reeks of political corruption. And then we have Robert Kennedy, who's, running for president and, facing kind of an onslaught from the mainstream media, being accused of anti-Semitism, being accused of all kinds of things. We have Cornel West, who is running as a third party candidate. And we're in a very, very strange political moment. People forget that Kamala Harris will be on the ballot. Kamala Harris, if Joe Biden wins the election, we're really voting, it will be Kamala Harris who's won because she's going to be president. But they're doing everything they can to kind of cover her up and hide her because she's even less popular than Biden is. So there you go.
Yeah. Again, even though she's younger, but I don't want her to be my president either. So, okay, before I finish, I do want to share one thing because I just discovered this morning something interesting. I truly think everybody would find that interesting. So we talked about Robert Byrd, right? And he was giving a speech about not to go into Iraq. I just find that speech is so relevant today. So I put something together. It's about 3 minutes. The speech was 12 minutes, but I cut them out and speed up. So let's have a look to see what he said here. Okay. Remember, he's 84 years old. Okay.
Today, I weep for my country. I've watched the events of recent months with a heavy, heavy heart. No more is the image of America one of strong yet benevolent peacekeeper. The image of America, Madam President, has changed. Around the globe, our word is disputed. Our intentions are questioned. Instead of reasoning with those with whom we disagree, we demand obedience or threaten recrimination. Instead of isolating Saddam Hussein, we seem to have succeeded in isolating ourselves. After the war has ended, the United States will have to rebuild much more than the country of Iraq. We will have to rebuild America's image around the globe. The case that this administration tries to make to justify its fixation with war is tainted by charges of falsified documents and circumstantial evidence. But this administration has directed all of the anger, fear, and grief which emerged from the ashes of the Twin Towers and the twisted metal of the Pentagon towards a tangible villain, one we can see and hate and attack. There is a pervasive sense of rush and risk and too many questions unanswered. How long will we be in Iraq? What will be the cost? What is the ultimate mission? How great is the danger here at home? A pall has fallen over the Senate chamber. We avoid our solemn duty to debate the one topic on the minds of all Americans, even while scores of thousands of our sons and daughters faithfully do their duty in Iraq. What is happening to this country, my country, your country, our country? When did we decide to risk undermining international order by adopting a radical and doctrinary approach to using our awesome military might? How can we abandon diplomatic efforts when the turmoil in the world cries out for diplomacy? Why can this president not seem to see that America's true power lies not in its will to intimidate, but in its ability to inspire? War appears inevitable, but I continue to hope that the cloud will lift. Perhaps reason will somehow still prevail. I, along with millions, scores of millions of Americans, will pray for the safety of our troops, for the innocent civilians, women, children, babies, old and young, crippled, deformed, sick in Iraq, and for the security of our homeland. May God continue to bless the United States of America in the troubled days ahead. And may we somehow recapture the vision which for the present eludes us.
Don't you think it's a very good speech? It's even relevant today.
Absolutely. And, Robert Byrd is an interesting case in American politics because he was a member of Congress. And he was at one point a Ku Klux Klan member. He was a leader of the Ku Klux Klan. But as politics in America shifted, he realized that racism was not a good thing. And he became actually a very big supporter of the Black community, the civil rights movement and things. And he just kind of showed that people can change, people can shift over the years. And I believe he's from West Virginia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
and
West Virginia.
West Virginia, now is pretty conservative. But, West Virginia, the mining unions had a lot of power. And there was a lot of support for organized labor and coal miner strikes, and coal miners would go out on strike with firearms and such. And that he being a Democrat from West Virginia, he was a Democrat, and the miners' unions supported Democrats. The Democrats were the party of Jim Crow and racism, so he was a racist at one point. But then the Democratic Party changed and kind of shifted, and as a result, he shifted as well. And he was kind of a strong liberal coming out of that tradition of organized labor in West Virginia, which I think is very interesting. And that shift in West Virginia politics, for example, the evangelical Christian right, as that was becoming a big factor in American politics, you had the textbook riots. That was very famous in West Virginia, where it was coal miners and people who'd gone out on strike before were going out on strike against their children learning Darwinian evolution in school, and having not being taught religion in school, and opposing school textbooks. And you saw people who had been associated with left-wing labor radicalism being associated with conservatism, and that was kind of a shift, the beginning of neoconservatism in American politics. And the textbook riots in West Virginia were a big part of that. But more recently, in the last couple of years, we saw the West Virginia teachers strike, which was not even sanctioned by the union. And it was essentially all the teachers in the state of West Virginia were going to have to wear a band that monitored their behavior, how much they exercised and such. And if they didn't exercise, or they ate the wrong foods or whatever, they would be fined in their healthcare insurance bill. It was absolutely ridiculous. And so the teachers of West Virginia, even though the union didn't give them permission, they all just started calling in sick, and they had a strike all across the state of West Virginia, and they won. They forced the state to back down against its very restrictive and privacy violating healthcare policies. So that labor militant spirit is still alive in West Virginia. And so West Virginia, again, it was a really strong place of supporting Donald Trump because of talk of jobs and economic nationalism, and because the woke stuff is not popular among those folks in West Virginia. They are conservative. But at the same time, they're low-income working people. And so economic issues, there was a lot of support for Bernie Sanders in West Virginia also. So I think, the confusion in American politics is kind of concentrated in that state. And you look at Robert Byrd, how he had been a Klansman, but then he was speaking so eloquently against the war in Iraq and been such a big supporter of civil rights afterwards. It shows, West Virginia was originally not even a state. It was part of Virginia. And then it broke away because it was against slavery. So there you go.
Yeah. I just, when I was thinking, I just thought about this, what he talked about. I didn't find the other clip. There was supposedly, he actually was pointing at the C-SPAN camera. He said, "You are going to regret this," talking about the Iraq war. He actually said that. I thought that was so interesting. And then when I look at his speech, I was like, okay, if you change the Iraq to Ukraine, it's very much the same speech you can make today. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all I have today. And if you like this kind of update, please hit the like button and subscribe. And we will try to give another update next week. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
All right. See you next week. Thank you.
See you. Bye. Yep.